Hey guys, so in this video we're going to look at whether playing on a 240Hz monitor is worth it in Fortnite. I want to give you guys a fair warning in case you're a little confused why the background gameplay looks so different. What you're watching are the first two games I played on 240Hz the other day. I decided to use a smart resample mode in my video editing software to render this video, which basically means that I merge multiple frames into one to try and make 60 FPS look like 240 FPS. Rendering my video this way also gives it a motion blur-like effect, which you've probably noticed by now. Trust me though, I understand YouTube limits video frame rates to 60 FPS. The point of this video is not to try and show what 240Hz looks like, because that's just not possible on YouTube right now. The point of this video is instead to see whether it's worth it to splurge on a 240Hz monitor or not. I've actually wanted to make this video for a really long time, but I never had the space on my desk to get a new main monitor. Now that I'm out of college, I was able to buy one and set it up. I'll talk more about which 240Hz monitor I actually got, my first impressions of it, review, and overall recommendation at the end of the video. I know a lot of you guys are interested in comparing 240Hz to 144Hz and 144Hz to 60Hz, which is something I'll also do in this video, but there are probably even more of you guys who don't know what any of these numbers mean or why they matter. To make it simpler for everyone, I'll throw some timestamps on the screen now for each different section of the video. I want to cover all the basics before we get more specific into Fortnite and my experience on 240Hz. Feel free to skip around, but I always recommend watching the whole thing through so you can understand everything and gain more knowledge on the subject yourself. So let's jump into it, starting with an introduction to what 240Hz means and what it actually is. 240Hz refers to the refresh rate of your monitor. Your monitor's refresh rate is just the number of times your monitor refreshes the image on your screen every single second. Hertz is the derived unit of frequency, which means you get hertz from measuring seconds, and if you're a nerd like me and interested in this stuff, it's the inverse of seconds. So 2 hertz is half a second, 1 hertz is a second, half a hertz is 2 seconds, and so on and so forth. Who would have thought you guys would be learning so much about science in a Fortnite video, right? Anyways, some popular monitor refresh rates are 60, 75, 120, 144, 175, and 240. A 60Hz monitor refreshes the image on your screen 60 times per second, while a 240Hz monitor refreshes the image 240 times per second. The higher the refresh rate, the smoother the image will be, since you're seeing whatever it is more times than you would with a lower refresh rate monitor. There will also be less ghosting, which is when part of the image still remains on your screen while the other visuals have changed. When your monitor is constantly refreshing faster, there won't be any parts of the image left behind to give that weird ghosting effect. Now, your monitor's refresh rate and its hertz are completely different than your FPS. FPS stands for frames per second, and it's basically how many frames or images your game and computer generates per second. The more FPS you get, the better, for basically the same reason why a higher refresh rate is better. Your game will be smoother and run better overall. Anything less than 60 FPS will be choppy and slow. You can even test this by capping your frames in game at 30 and seeing how bad it is. So your FPS is how many images your game is producing every second, and then your refresh rate is how many times your monitor actually shows it to you each second. Your monitor's refresh rate does not affect your FPS at all, and vice versa. This means you could get 300 FPS on a 60Hz monitor or 30 FPS on the same 60Hz monitor. Your FPS will fluctuate depending on how powerful your machine is and what game you're playing, but your refresh rate will always stay the same. With a 144Hz monitor, it will refresh the image on your screen 144 times no matter what. The way your FPS and refresh rate are linked is in the benefits they provide together. With higher FPS and refresh rates, your input lag will decrease. Input lag is just the difference in time it takes for an action, like say hitting one of your building keybinds, and then how long it will take for your game to perform that action. With a higher FPS, your game will register it faster since it's producing more frames, and with a higher refresh rate, your monitor will show it quicker. In shooter games like Fortnite, you always want as much FPS as possible because, like we just talked about, your game will be smoother and feel more responsive. Evidently, a higher refresh rate is better than a lower refresh rate, but the question arises of whether a 240Hz monitor is worth it compared to 144Hz or even 60Hz. The reason it might not be worth it is because of the other way in which your refresh rate and FPS are linked. Unless you're consistently getting 240 FPS, 240Hz is useless. Let's say that you average 140 FPS instead of 240 FPS. Your game will only be updating the pixels 140 times per second. Your monitor, on the other hand, is refreshing the image 240 times per second, so there's 100 lost frames that aren't accounted for and that you just don't see. This is why buying a 144Hz monitor is useless if you play on console, because Fortnite is literally capped at 60 FPS. You never want to buy a monitor with a higher refresh rate than the FPS you get. If you do, you're basically wasting money as your monitor is refreshing faster than your game is actually putting out the image. But what if you average more than 144 FPS? Should you get a 144 Hz monitor? And what if you average 240 FPS? Should you get a 240 Hz monitor? A little background on me, I played Fortnite on console for 7 months. I used a 60 Hz monitor, and I actually played before Fortnite was at 60 FPS. If you played Fortnite before March 2018 on console, it didn't run at 60 FPS. It may sound crazy, but the OG Season 2 and 3 players know what I'm talking about. Looking back now, 60 FPS and 60 Hz at the time wasn't bad because you didn't really know what you were missing out on. I never knew how much of an upgrade a higher FPS and a higher refresh rate monitor would be. It wasn't until August of last year when I switched over to PC and I bought my first 144 Hz monitor. Immediately there was a noticeable difference between 60 Hz and 144 Hz. Even when I had over 200 FPS on 60 Hz the first day I played, when I finally set up my 144 Hz monitor, the difference was crazy. It was ridiculously smoother, more responsive, and just overall better. My building and editing was better, my aiming was better, and it just felt like a whole new game. I was on 144 Hz for like 10 months up until 2 days ago when I got my 240 Hz monitor. Now I'm the definition of a true gamer nerd neck. The monitor I got was a 25-inch Alienware one that I bought off Amazon for like $350, so it definitely was not cheap. For reference, my 144 Hz is a ViewSonic 24-inch that was $200, and then the original 60 Hz monitor I had was a 23-inch Asus that I got for $100. When I first tried my 240 Hz monitor, I hopped into creative to test it out since I can easily hit 240 FPS there, and I did feel a difference. It definitely wasn't as big of a difference between 60 and 144 Hz, but it was there. In terms of smoothness, I really didn't feel much of a difference compared to 144 Hz though. If you were to say put both monitors next to each other and then you didn't tell me which was which, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference by just watching the gameplay on the screen. Obviously the colors and the graphics were a little different, but I couldn't see a visible difference in smoothness. There was a difference in response time though. On 240 Hz, everything felt snappier and like I was in more control. It was actually kind of weird because everything was so damn quick and responsive. I don't think my eyes were used to it, and to be able to see so many things so quickly compared to 144 Hz, so it almost felt like my eyes were lagging behind. I don't even really know how to explain it. It's as if everything was so fast that there was motion blur, which of course there wasn't actual motion blur. In fact, there was less, but I could definitely feel less input lag on 240 Hz. That's kind of why I added the smart resample setting when I rendered this video. Smart resampling, like I said before, takes actual gameplay which is recorded at 240 FPS, and then it blends it at 60 FPS, which gives it the ghosting and motion blur like effect. This is how you can like kind of get the effect of 240 Hz, but obviously it's not what you really see because there's no actual motion blur when you're playing on 240 Hz. If there is, your monitor might be broken and you might need to get a new one. Now, here's my recommendation for which refresh rate you should get in Fortnite and why. Starting with 60 Hz, if you're on console or you can only get 60 FPS on PC, which for most of you guys should be pretty achievable, stick with a 60 Hz monitor. If you get a 144 Hz monitor, but you don't at least average 144 FPS, you're just throwing money away, which could be used in the Fortnite item shop using my code. I think there are 75 Hz and 120 Hz monitors which would be better suited for you guys if you can't average at least 144 FPS but you get more than 60. But if you're on console, it is capped at 60 FPS and it probably won't ever be uncapped or able to get anything higher. So get a cheap 60 Hz monitor and then save up for a PC. I highly recommend everyone who gets at least 144 FPS to get a 144 Hz monitor. You can obviously still be good on 60 Hz and get to Champion Division with it. Secret Milan actually qualified for the Winter Royale finals and I think one other tournament on a 60 Hz laptop. But in all honesty, you're at a huge disadvantage compared to being on 144 Hz. 144 Hz won't turn you into a god, but it will make you better. If you can't build on 60 Hz, upgrading to 144 won't turn you into mongrel. You need to watch more of my videos to do that. But trust me when I say 144 Hz is worth every penny. Finally, my recommendation for 240 Hz is this. If you want to qualify for the World Cup in New York or you want to be the best possible player you can be, then you need every advantage possible. Top athletes use the top gear, so the same thing should be done for Fortnite. 240 Hz is better than 144 Hz, there's no denying it. It's more responsive and snappier and you do feel a difference. Maybe not as big as the difference between 60 and 144, but 240 is better. The biggest problems with 240 Hz monitors are first the price tags. I got one of the cheapest and it was still nearly double the price of my 144 Hz one. The other problem is that Fortnite is really poorly optimized. What this means is that I usually get 240 FPS on average, but during late game arena and World Cup qualifiers, my FPS drops all the way down below to like 100 at the highest. Even the best and most powerful PCs in the world struggle to get more than 160 frames when you're playing a stacked endgame with tons of building and people everywhere. If you're used to being on 240 FPS and 240 Hertz, and then all of a sudden it drops down to 100 FPS endgame, there could be some bad unintended consequences. Your aim, building, and editing might suffer because the game isn't as smooth as what you're used to, or if you were just constantly on 144 Hertz. This isn't a huge issue, and most well-known pro players are on 240 Hz, which should be pretty indicative of how useful it is, but it's still something for you to think about. Overall, if you can afford it and you are truly looking to become the best, splurge on that 240 Hz monitor. Just do it. It won't automatically turn you into Tfue, but it will definitely help. If you can't, or you don't average at least 240 FPS, then get a 144 Hz monitor. Dollar for dollar, a 144 Hz monitor is insanely worth it, and you'll thank me later if you've been on 60 Hz this entire time. In the end though, it's up to you and whether you can afford the purchase, so don't feel pressured to go drop a bunch of money on a new monitor. Subscribing to this channel will definitely help you improve more than a new monitor will. But seriously, if this video helped you guys out and you learned something new, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Thank you to everyone using code Jarian. The support you guys have shown me recently has been insane, and I really can't thank you all enough. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.